the first question, you know, what can we as business owners do if we see an employee doing something bad? And something bad is if we think it's, you know, it's crossing the line, it's discriminating, saying something, any type of, you know, a bad doing.
Well, I think first thing we need to talk to business owners about is, number one, is they need to have some policies and procedures in place, right? As humans, we should know better, right? We should know right from wrong, but it's important. Every agency should have a handbook that clearly states what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and then the punishment that could be done if they violate these policies and procedures. You've got to have some kind of structure in your business. And that's the best way to start it, is with policies and procedures. Now, handling situations and incidents is not a cookie cutter, right? One size fits all. It all depends on the circumstance and the person, and also the history of relationships, the history of behavior with that individual. So I always tell people, look, if when in doubt, if you really feel that it's someone's life or safety is in danger, or employees or your consumers, just call the police. You know, the police are there for you. And if they're not needed, they'll get there and they at least document an incident report, and then they'll give you information on the proper steps to take depending on your circumstance. But I think it's important for employers to have that policy and procedures, and also training. You know, I've always looked at individuals who we believe there's misconduct within an organization. And I look back and say, okay, was this person trained to handle this type of situation? And if the answer is no, then the expectation shouldn't be that they should know this, because they were never trained on that. So that behavior, where you maybe think is unethical or misconduct, it may be just the fact that they weren't aware of what they should or should not be doing. And so if you do all the training, then you can separate it, right? You can say, okay, it's not a training issue, so now it's a behavior issue. And how do we address that? Now, is it a criminal? Is it something that we need as a counsel this employee on, and write them up and reprimand them and work with them? Or do we need to dismiss them? And again, being able to dismiss them, you have to have documentation and supporting documentation that they knew that this was wrong. They knew what their expectations were, which helps you justify separating that person from your business.
And so just so I understand, so if it's an employee, I handle it with my handbook and our policies and procedures, right? I follow the rules. I'm going to set the stage of what we're going to allow in the company. I get that. But what if it's a customer? Say it's a business that is open to the public. What do we do then?
So again, it's not a cookie cutter, right? So depending on the circumstance and the situation, what that consumer is doing, if that consumer or customer is doing something that is going to put your other customers and consumers in danger, or causing such a loud disturbance that you approaching that person professionally and calmly and asking them to leave your business, because you have that right if somebody's causing a disturbance and they refuse to, then you're going to have to step back and let the authorities take over. You don't want to get yourself involved in a physical altercation. But I always tell people just to professionally, if you can, safely and professionally confront the consumer and explain to them why what they're doing is offensive. And if they don't, you would have that option as a business owner, that if they acknowledge that and they apologize, that you let them remain in your business, or if they continue that behavior and disregard your concerns and the concerns of your other customers, employees, then that's the next step you would have to do, is you would want to call authorities. And that's a set of something that's happening right at the moment.
Should we try to videotape it, or?
Videotaping is good because it's evidence, right? But again, it would depend on the circumstance. If it's just somebody who's being loud and is being disruptive, the best thing you want to do is just end that disruption immediately and have them leave. A lot of the time, situations like that, when you pull your camera out and you start recording, it actually escalates the situation, right? So you've got to look at, and as a business owner, you got to use your common sense and say, okay, is this something that I should just talk? We call it verbal judo, right? Verbal judo is you want to de-escalate with your words in your conversation and just remove them from the property immediately. Or is it so far that this person is becoming violent And at that point, somebody should be calling the police. And if somebody can safely record it, I would say yes, but I wouldn't recommend, if you had the option to call, to be on the phone with police or record, you want to be on the phone with police. You want to be able to get that dispatch, get the description of the individual, what's going on, who's involved, who you are. In case the police show up, they know you're the good person, you're the manager or the business owner. So recording is fine because it's good evidence. You do away with that he said, she said, right? And this is the facts. This is what happened. Here's a video, and here's the sound, and here's the audio, and everything else. But do it safely. We never wanted a business owner or employees to put themselves in danger. We love our business, and we cherish what we've developed, but that's something that we can fix later. And to lose a life of one of our, whether the business owner or an employee, we don't want that to happen.
Right, right. And so what do you say to the people who say they don't trust the police? You know, who else would they call? I mean, we hear that a lot on the national level. I haven't seen it locally, but it's still, some people are still out there saying it.
Right. Yeah, and I hear it all the time. When I was on the campaign trail, I sat at the table with people who did not like law enforcement. And I gravitate to that conversation. I gravitate to being at that table because I learned so much. It's hard for me to tell people they're wrong on how they feel, because most of our feelings and our perceptions are based on our experiences. So they've experienced something in their lifetime, maybe more than once, that has given them the perception that they don't like law enforcement. So I like to talk to them to find out and agree to disagree. At the end of the day, we still may disagree with each other, but at least I understand why they feel the way they do. So there's a level of respect that comes from having those tough conversations with people at the table. But I will tell them, I will say to those who are not wanting to call the police, if it's a situation that's happening right there at the moment, right? And someone's life's in danger, your life's in danger. I mean, you need to put your trust in the police at that time, because you don't want to lose your life over a confrontation, over in your business, or potentially get somebody else hurt. Let the police handle it. Now, if it's a situation that's not happening at the moment, I'll give an example. An employee comes to you, or you approach an employee who's got bruises, right? And you contact this employee to say, look, I've noticed that you have bruises on you, and you're detached from the group. You're not hanging out. You're not talking as much. You're losing weight. Whatever the red flags are, and that person says, hey, I'm being abused at home, but I don't want to call the police. Because if you call the police, then it will make the situation worse. At that moment, as a business owner, you don't have to dial 911. You can start looking at several different organizations here locally that help domestic violence victims. And they can bring them in and start getting the help that they need, the counseling that they need. And at some point, those counselors may say, okay, now it's time that we have to call the authorities. So as a business owner, you need to know, okay, this is an emergency situation. It's happening right now in front. We need somebody to come take control, or this is after the fact, right? This is something that happened a week, 2 weeks, 3 days ago. Let's try to get some help other than law enforcement if that person doesn't feel safe calling the police. Because this is what I tell people. I would rather contact a nonprofit or organization that's going to help him than to say, well, if you don't want to call the police, we're not going to help you. Well, that's not going to help the situation at all, right? So if they feel comfortable talking to a counselor or a nonprofit organization, then let's get them the help that they need if it's not going to be the police.
And so I like what you're saying there, but how would we as business owners identify the signs? What would we look for to know if we have an employee who's being abused or who's in a violent situation at home, and what kind of signs do we look for?
There are a lot of signs. And so just a few that from my experience in my career that I've heard people say is what, just as I mentioned a while ago, they're real detached. They become very quiet. They're not really social like they were before. They don't laugh as much. They stop taking care of themselves, right? They're not fixing their hair. They're not dressing up like they used to. They're wearing a lot of clothes, dark clothes. long sleeves. A lot of that is to sometimes conceal the injuries, right? So turtlenecks in the summertime, losing weight, missing days, calling in sick. They would never do that before. Just a lot of this stuff, these behavior changes in this individual, it should be a flag. And I know a lot of the times people say, "Well, it's not my business. I'm not going to get involved." Well, it is your business because it's your business, right? You're the employer, and these are your employees, and you should care about them just as you care about your family. I do with mine. If there's something wrong or they need help, I want to be there for them in any way that I can. And you never, I don't want to speak this upon anybody, but you don't want, what's going to end up happening, and you see it on the news all the time, and it's disturbing, is you see this family violence that leaks into the business. The husband comes to the business, and you've seen it on the news where they shoot up employees, or it's happened here in San Antonio years ago on 1604 at a real estate firm, where the guy went in there and shot and killed the family, the mother, his wife, and then killed himself. So we need to get involved. It is our business as business owners. We want to help people. So they need to get involved. They need to get engaged. There's a lot of websites, Julissa, that it's online training and it's free. Mental health training, it's free. How to recognize domestic violence, it's free. All these things are free to anybody who could just go online and research it and take the course, and it helps you identify suspicious things and things that you should be looking at for your employees. And the thing is this, that knowledge is really good, because now you can apply that to your home, right? If you see a family member behaving that way. So you have that knowledge to share, not just in your place of business, but in your personal life and at home.
I like that. And I guess the thing is, like, a lot of the times we think as business owners, especially small business owners, we're already juggling a lot of different roles, right? And we carry responsibilities of everything, all of the above, right? We can't just leave anything out. And sometimes we think, well, I mean, I don't want to be the bartender at the office either, like, right? I don't want to be the one they come for advice, or I'm not trained to be the psychologist, or that. And so I like the idea of what you're saying of, at least listing some of these nonprofits and having them available in different break rooms and stuff. So if they need to, they can have access to it. But no, to go is ideal, but also identifying it and saying, hey, I'm noticing some kind of behavior change. I just want to know if you need anything. Here's a list of things that we'd be happy to get you connected to or something. I think that's a role that we can play as employers, right? So I like what you're saying there.
But in the chat, I provided some phone numbers and some additional information, both for the Family Justice Center and the suicide hotline. So those are free resources, as Willie was mentioning. So please check them out and have them readily available, because you never know when something might happen in your workplace.
Well, and times are tough right now, right? And so sometimes, even though your employees working, they have a spouse who's not, and and everybody deals with that kind of a tough time. Everybody deals with it differently, and the holidays are coming, so I think it's good for us to make sure we do our part there. One of the things I wanted to talk about is, Black Lives Matters is real, right? Discrimination does happen. And I know that our city and county officials have done a lot to get involved here locally, to try to set an example of what we can do in our own city to protect our communities, right? And I know, Willie, that you were a big part of some of those conversations, and I just wanted to get your input of, how you think that went, and what else can we do?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that I've learned through this is having that conversation. I mean, we have to have that difficult conversation that nobody wants to have. And if you ignore the fact that there are issues, amongst all professions, and if you try to ignore that, it's just gonna continue to build and build and build. And so I've always been a person that I like to focus on the cause of symptoms, right? So many people focus on the symptom itself and it never gets resolved. The cause, it just continues to happen. And so what you do is you suppress the symptom for a little while and then it comes right back. It's like you have a cough, you go to, your local store and you buy cough medicine and all it does is suppresses the cough. It's not curing what's causing the cough. It's just suppressing the symptom temporarily. And so I think that it's time that all these organizations that are coming out and they're using their voice to express their concerns, I think it's time that we start looking at and we start listening. What's causing this? Is it the way we police? Is it the way we train? Is it a lack of training? Is it the lack of collaboration resources? I think it's time to do that. I did have these tough conversations. I was invited to a podcast that other law enforcement leaders didn't want to be part of. And it talked about the people on the panel with me were all believed that law enforcement just like to beat and shoot people on the east side. And so they were surprised, number one, that I was willing to have that tough conversation. But I wanted to have it because, as I mentioned before, that's the way you learn. After that podcast and we talked, I learned so much of why they felt the way they felt. And they learned so much of why police do what they do. And having that dialogue and that conversation, it's important. And now there's a difference, right? You have to have a conversation and be professional. I'm for your amendments, your constitutional rights for freedom of speech. I'm for that. But when you take that freedom of speech and you turn it into violence and crime, then you drown out your message. And people aren't even focusing on your message anymore. They're looking at the destruction of what you're doing, the division that's being created. So I always like to have that professional dialogue, professional and courtesy dialogue and conversations with these different organizations and groups to learn why is it they feel the way they do, and then explain to them with their questions of why law enforcement do some of the things that they do, and collaborate and work together. We have bad apples in every industry. I worked at the district attorney's office for 4 years, and a lot of these cases came in, and there were doctors and lawyers and mechanics, and I mean, you name it, construction workers and security officers. I mean, you named it, committing these horrible, horrible crimes. So we have bad apples in every occupation. But as business owners, it's our responsibility to speak up when we see something. And again, sometimes what's right is not easy, but it's our responsibility to speak up and hold those employees accountable and to teach them right leadership. And leadership does not have to be, and that's what a lot of people screw this up. Leadership is not a position. Leadership is a behavior. So we can train every single employee that works for us to be a leader, to lead each other. And leaders do what? They boost each other, they encourage each other, they motivate each other during those times when they're down. And if you have that relationship with your employees, then what we just discussed, Julissa, those signs will be easier to identify because we have that bond, we have that leadership relationship with each other, that when their behavior starts to change and starts to adjust, then we can identify it immediately. And then we have that relationship where we can sit down with that person to say, what's going on? I've noticed this difference in your behavior. How can I help?
I like what you're saying about, first, sitting at the table to talk about it, right? It's so important to be heard. I think a lot of the times we just want to be heard, and whether it's on what other side, it doesn't really matter, because it's where it, like you said, the experience is what we feel and what we remember, regardless, right? And so, but we do know that crime is out there, and we need law enforcement. We need somebody to help keep it in order, right? But we also have to figure out, how do we do our part to make sure that, at least in our business premises, we're gonna try to control what happens with our employees, with our policies and procedures. And then, but what do we do when we're seeing a crime being committed on our premises outside or something? Do we put up signs, or what can we do to say, hey, that's not allowed in this premises?
Right. So one of the things you said early on, you nailed it, right? Is that the business community are the eyes and ears of the community. If you go to the barber shop, right, you hear all the cheesemen, right? You hear, who's doing what in the community, who's getting divorced, or, there's all kinds of information, because everyone talks to each other in the community, in the businesses. They have that conversation. They trust each other. They develop that relationship with each other. So you nailed it, that our businesses in general are the eyes and ears in law enforcement. So it's important to collaborate with each other. And you're right, we need law enforcement to have accountability and structure for our community. We need it. And we talked about this before, and we've talked about this several times. He says that if you look at the areas, geographical areas with high crime, the businesses aren't thriving there. There's no workforce development, economic development. Nobody wants to move over there. So that's data that supports the fact what you just said, is we need police, because where there's high crime, there's no economic development, there's no business, there's high school dropouts, there's teen pregnancy. So we need law enforcement in there, but we also need law enforcement to sit at the table with the community and with these groups and communicate with each other. And how can we collaborate and work together? Because there's only 2,000 or so police officers, and some of those are detectives and there are on the streets. And we have almost 2 million people in San Antonio. So the police are actually outnumbered, right? So we have more eyes and ears on the streets that can help law enforcement communicate with law enforcement as to the concerns. And going back to what you're asking about the signs, absolutely. So it's like when you go home, right? You don't just say, well, I got an alarm system, so I'm not gonna lock the doors. No, you lock your doors and you set your alarm system, and you probably have cameras. So you have all these different tools, right, in your toolbox, just in case. That's what I say about small business. Set your alarm, use your cameras, put signs up. If you're not gonna want solicitors in your location, put that sign up. Let them know before they enter. We don't allow solicitors. If there's something else, if you don't want a weapon in your store or your business, put that sign up. Let them know. Let that consumer know. I don't want you to bring your weapons, even if you're licensed. I don't want you to bring your weapons in here. Those signages is important. Again, it's a way of communication, but it's also a way of covering the business also, right? So if something should happen, you can say, well, I had the sign up here and I didn't want this person to come in here to begin with, and they did anyway. So I think for liability purposes, it's good to have those signs out inside and outside of your property.
And that's a good thing that you talk about the liability of it, right? As business owners, we have to have insurance to protect us, because the things that are out of our control are really the things that we need the most insurance for, right? The managing that risk, because it's those things we can't control. Earlier you mentioned about the high crime areas. Some of us have our businesses in high crime areas, and we're doing our best to protect our premises, protect our employees. But what else can we do to make sure that at least in our community, everybody says talk to your neighbors, protect each other, but what else can we do to protect our everything we've invested in these businesses, and what else can we do?
So one of the things that I always recommend is, like, for example, where your business is located, if you were to call the police, officers from the central substation would respond. So if you're a business owner and you don't know that, you can call 207 SAPD, 207 SAPD, and you could give them the address of your business and ask the dispatcher, if I called the police at this address, the officers that respond, what substation would they come from? And let's just say they come from central substation. You could ask that person, can you transfer me to the central substation? They'll transfer you there. Once you get transferred to that central substation, you can ask for a safe officer. The safe officers are responsible for different areas of the town, and they come to your business or your home if you have concerns with any type of activity going on around you. So you can actually invite that safe officer to your business, sit down with them, and explain your concerns. If you feel that night there's people behind your building using narcotics or selling narcotics, then you can communicate that to the officer. That officer would then transfer that information to the appropriate unit. Let's just say narcotics, because it's a narcotic complaint. Well, then at night they can go up and set up and do surveillance on that at your building or your location to make sure that they're not using drugs or dealing drugs or narcotics beyond this. So again, that goes right back to what we've been talking about, that communication, that dialogue. You need to talk to that law enforcement agency. You need to talk to those safe officers. You're right. You do want your neighbors, you want to talk to your neighbors and look out for each other, be the eyes and ears. But if you're in a business area and your neighbors are working the same hours you are and y'all are gone after hours, then who's gonna make that phone call? Who's gonna express those concerns that are happening after hours? So I would recommend small businesses to find out what substation covers your area and then speak to a safe officer. Before that safe officer goes to your business, have a list of your concerns and questions you have for that officer.
And so does it help to send them tamales or any tacos or anything like that?
What that's saying, if you feed them, they will come.
Yeah, it doesn't. So one of the things that I wanted to get your opinion on is, what about, I mean, we talk about alarms and cameras and setting our policies and procedures, but what about, how do you feel about weapons on site on the premises or pepper spray or any type of, of some employers that feel they have to have that to protect themselves?
So that's a really that's a really touchy subject, right? So I always tell people that if they want to carry a firearm or an intermediate weapon like pepper spray, they need to be trained on it. That's my biggest gripe with the license to carry a weapon is the lack of self-defense training, gun retention training that goes in that. You just show up, you take this class, you shoot 50 rounds, you pass, and you get a license, you carry a gun. Officers go through extensive training through the academy and then throughout the year, 40-hour training each year on their weapons, and they're still getting weapons taken from them. And then we have these holsters that there's several different things you need to do before you even get the gun out. The bad guys are still taking guns out. So if a person is going to carry a weapon, I recommend them to take some look up and research where they can do some self-defense training and gun retention training. So that way they can defend themselves from someone taking the gun from them and using it against them. So many cases that have happened where a bad guy comes into a store and the business owner pulls a weapon and is hesitant to use it. So the bad guy takes the gun. Now the bad guy has a weapon which he didn't have one to begin with. So at that kind of situation, it'd be best not even to pull the weapon out at all. So it's important for them to be trained and feel comfortable and confident that in the event they had to use it, that they would be able to use it. Same thing with pepper spray. A lot of people don't realize that you have to know the wind direction. If you have a store and you have fans blowing and they're blowing towards you and you try to spray, that pepper spray is going to get on you. And so you're not going to be able to see, you're going to be impaired. If it's a restaurant, be sure that you're using it at a moment where you have no choice, because what's going to happen in a restaurant is or even in a store, you're going to have to clear everybody out. That pepper spray is going to get into the air system and it's going to go through the whole place. And so you're going to have to get everyone out of there and to make sure until that stuff gets out of the system. So that way people's eyes aren't being burned and their skin's not being affected by the pepper spray. So those weapons are fine, but please learn how to use them. And not every pepper spray is the same. You have the stream, you have the mist, the aerosol. There's so many different ones. You need to research the difference between them and which one should you use in the environment that you're in, whether you're inside most of the time or you're inside or outside most of the time. You need to know some are better for different types of environments.
And so, Willie, you talked about, say somebody comes in and this is more the active shooting training, right? Because I know that there's been discussion of that. What do we do? How can we prepare ourselves? What kind of training should we have our employees go through to make sure that they know if somebody comes in, we're all in danger, but what can we do?
So you have to have a plan. It kind of goes back to that policies and procedures, right? The expectations, responsibilities. I always recommend businesses to have a plan. If you can do the active shooting training, do the active shooting training and try to do it at your facility. I've done them, hundreds of them, and I always like to go visit the location first because not every business is shaped the same, right? Some have more exit doors than others. Some have windows, some don't have windows. And so I like to do a walkthrough because I'm not going to tell you to run and try to barricade yourself in a room where there's no windows and no other escape. When across the hall there's a room that has a window, and I look at everything: the doors that open in versus doors that open out. Doors that open inwards are easier to secure from somebody coming in and barricade than those doors that swing out into the hall. So you have to have a plan. You have to have a plan, and everybody needs to understand the responsibility, and everybody knows what they're going to do at that in that type of and during that moment. So there's consistency of what's going to happen, and everyone knows. There's still going to be chaos. Adrenaline's still going to be going, but it minimizes it a little bit when you're trained. That's why I tell people, police officers, firefighters, EMS, they're called first responders, not reactors. They don't react to things; they respond. The reason they respond appropriately based on their training and their experience. So if we train our employees and give policies and procedures, then they're going to respond appropriately and sometimes a little bit more calmer because at least they feel a little bit more secure that they know what they're supposed to be doing and they know how to execute it. So I would highly recommend business owners to do some type of training for their employees, and if they can put it on paper as a policy for them to know code words, right? And that's important. If you're in a situation where you don't want to yell, call the police, because it's going to trigger the consumer that you want the police called on, you may want to use a code word, whatever that may be. Code red, and then that person, one of your employees knows code red means call the police. And that means I'm going to get back in the back of the store and I'm calling the police. I'm not sure what's going on, but the police is needed because code red means it's an emergency. And if you call the dispatcher, you can say that. You can say, look, my supervisor announced code red. That's my responsibility to call the police. That means there's something urgent happening in the front of the store. Police and police. I don't know what's going on, but he did say code red. So that training is important.
I like that. I think, we have to do everything we can, right? Or at least say we tried to do everything that we knew to do, right? And these are good policies to have in place and really to protect us to go back to our families, right? We want our employees to everybody go home, enjoy your families, and it didn't happen where you weren't able to do it because you came to work that day. It shouldn't be for that reason. So I like that. But one of the things that we talked about, calling law enforcement or using the nonprofits if we need assistance, right? They're there to do all kinds of services. But what about, when do we get involved with, our district council members or our precinct commissioners? I mean, they represent our areas of town. When do we go talk to them?
I would say anytime there's a concern. They work for us, right? Hopefully you use your voice and you voted for the best person you felt. Whether that person that's in office is someone you voted for or didn't vote for, they work for your area. Whether it's a precinct or whether it's a district, they work for you. You're the constituent, and so if there's an issue, something that's even as small as lighting. Lighting. We talk about illumination when we do security surveys on homes and businesses. We're big on illumination, light. So if there's street lights that are out, contact your city council member, contact the county commissioner, contact someone, and ask for a response. Tell them, I want a response of, did you get this message, number one, and what are you going to do about this lighting? Because the lighting itself could cause more crime depending on the area, depending on the location of that light that's out. Again, communication, right? So it's not just communicating with police in the community, but it's also communicating with our elected officials that are voted into positions to provide public safety for us. And they have the budget to fix things that are interrupting our business and causing more crime in the area. Such as that. Even if it's something where, if you notice, I've noticed it in certain areas of town, somebody will drop off a sofa And then that's like an open invitation to be a dumping site. And then you have a refrigerator, and then you have chairs, and you have all these things. And then next thing you know, you have people back there behind that stuff using drugs, or having sex, or So if that first person that saw the sofa immediately called the city council member or the county commissioner and start making complaints, and that thing's removed, then it shows that that behavior is not acceptable here. If you're going to dump something, it's going to be gone right away. So those are the things that we need to communicate with our elected officials, and communicate with them along with law enforcement, that this stuff is happening and we're not going to tolerate it.
I like what you're saying. I like even the fact that sometimes, even if it's an elected official we didn't vote for, right? They're still there working for us, and we need to just educate them of what's happening in our area. It just means that they don't know. And I know sometimes, like, I've called and said, come and visit us, because I want to point out some areas that we need help on, right? And so even pointing out areas like this area here is super dark at night. It's dangerous for people and kids to be walking around. Like, we don't know if somebody's hiding behind bushes or anything, but I mean, pointing those things out, and then they listen, right? Or like, there's this huge pothole right on our entrance and everybody falls there every time. Like, could you just patch it up, And so simple things, but the reality is that it goes back to getting involved, right? As business owners, get to know your representatives and let them know that you're a real business, and you're trying to get your work done, right? And sometimes they just need to know who you are and what you're doing. And a lot of the times, I also think, like, these elected officials, a lot of them work for free. They do, this is public service work, and they're out there they put their lives on hold to serve our communities, and help them out. Sometimes if they're being elected and you like the work they're doing, donate to them. Doesn't have to be a lot, but at least be a part of saying, I helped him get elected. I helped her be the one who's representing our community, because they listen. And I think that that's important too, as business owners. Again, we're business owners, but we're leaders in our businesses. We're leaders in our community. And we have to do everything we need to make sure that our voices are being heard, right? And when we see policies that are being passed in our local government, especially in our local government, and we think that is going to hurt us, or that's not going to be a good thing for us, we got to come and be heard. We got to contact them and say, this policy, this is what it's going to do. And, make sure that they hear your voice, because once they know, oh, I didn't know that, well, yeah, make sure you fix it, or before you go make that decision, make sure you hear every side of the opinions, because it can't just be one-sided, right? And so I love that we get to do that. And I know both Willie, you and we're very involved with that. And I think that's something that really we take it seriously, because it affects us, but it affects everybody else as well, right? And it's the same thing of being heard.
Right. I agree with you. And you and I have always said this, is that when we say that small business is the foundation or the backbone of the city, we mean it. It's not a soundbite we say just because it sounds really cool. We mean it. And I think that we have proven that by the things we've done separately for the community, and the things that we're doing. We're collaborating here at the Maestro, helping small business be successful. If the small business in San Antonio is providing almost 90% of the workforce, then our voice should matter. And people and the business owners need to understand that, is that their voice matters, and they need to speak up, because, as you mentioned, certain ordinances and certain local policies and procedures affect small businesses in so many ways. But a lot of the small business don't come out and voice it to the elected officials. They voice it amongst the business community, but that's not going to do any good. We need to go outside and speak. And if you're already collaborating with your city council member, if you're already collaborating with your county commissioner on issues in the community, then you're going to have that conduit to be able to get to them and have that conversation when you disagree with a new ordinance or a policy or procedure. You're going to have that relationship, and they're going to listen. So it's just so critical for us to communicate. I always say, hey, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? Because it's twice as important to listen as it is to speak. We have to have these conversations and really listen to our community and listen to our law enforcement and listen to our elected officials, and then collaborate on how can we fix it. We may not agree completely, but let's come to some meeting here in the middle, and how can we fix this for all people? Because this is not a political issue. This is not a party issue. This is a people issue. And we can't mix up public safety and prosperity with politics, because if we do, we'll screw it up every time. So we need to focus on people, and we need to focus on being prosperous for everyone here in Bexar County.
And being at the table, right? We need to be at the table. We need to use our voices and be a part, right? Play the role, because it's so critical for our community, and come and be heard. We need to know what you need and what is going on. And so I'm actually, thank you so much. I've learned so much today, and just hearing of all the things we need to do, and some of the, I'm grabbing the pieces of nuggets of things I got to go put in place as well too, right? And so, but I know that we're going to be launching this Maestro Life Lesson, and one of the things, this was a session we were doing in person, and when COVID hit, we stopped, and I know that we're going to launch it now through a podcast, and it's going to be virtual. And so I'm excited about it. And I know, Willie, because you're going to be leading this effort for us and at the Maestro Center. And so we're encouraging, as business owners, if you want to hear about a topic, call Maestro Center and let us know. If you have questions and things you want discussed, call the center. That's what they're there for, to help us, right? And Willie, maybe if you want to share a little bit about what you're planning to see on those life lessons.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this, because this is going to be that communication that you and I have been talking about. We're gonna bring in small businesses and to talk to them about how maybe COVID is affecting them, or maybe how a local policy or ordinance is affecting their business. And then what we're going to do is we're going to bring in those elected officials as well. And we want to know, what are you doing for your community? What are you doing for the small business within your community? What are you doing about public safety? Because there is a correlation, as I mentioned before, there's a correlation with public safety and prosperity, public safety and crime, no economic development, teen pregnancy. So there's a direct correlation. So this podcast is not going to be about sound bites. This is going to be about good, relevant information that business owners are going to be able to listen and learn from this. And then we're going to be able to communicate the concerns to our elected officials. And so what we'll do is in advance, we'll let them know this conversation is going to be taking place with maybe this precinct commissioner. Send us questions of things that are going on in your community that you would like us to ask this commissioner, or city council member, or state rep, or state senator, or county judge. We want this to be a conversation that is relevant. This is not going to be a podcast just to showboat on and just be on camera talking. We want people to take away from this podcast and learn a lot from it. And I'm excited about it. This is going to be something that I think that—
learn to understand you much better if I can get familiar with the way you talk. I need your permission to—
Sorry,
That's okay.
something happened.
That's all right. I thought that was a listener telling me that they couldn't understand me. No, so I'm excited about this, Julissa. I'm honored to that you asked me to host this show. This is going to be a show that people are going to want to listen to and learn from.
Yes. So, Mari, do you have anything else for us?
I just put on the chat that we will have an email from our programs director that you can directly send the topics and questions that Willie was mentioning for the podcast. If you have some comments and concerns, this is a way for you as business owners to be heard. So please send us those topics. Please send us those questions. I also put on our phone number feel free to pick up the phone and give us a call. We're here to support you and to help you. And we're super excited about this series coming 2021. And as soon as we have the lineup and we have the dates scheduled, we'll let you all know. So thank you all for listening and for being here through this platform today. And thank you, Willie, so much for leading this effort. It's a pleasure to have you on here. And I know you have a lot of knowledge and a lot of connections that we can leverage as business owners so that we can be a better community. And we're building San Antonio as a better community together and communicating and have somewhere where business owners can be heard. So I appreciate your efforts. And also, Julissa, thank you for coming on here and taking the time to lead this conversation as well with Willie. Both of you are doing amazing work in the community, and you're leaders that we want to follow. As business owners, we want to follow your lead as well. So thank you both for being on here. And as I said to the business owners, feel free to contact us anytime. We're here to support you. We're here to help you. And without further ado, Willie, if you want to say a couple of words before we finalize, and I think that it's been a really good session, and we hope you participate and you send us your questions and your topics, because we're going to be really looking forward, and you're gonna determine what these sessions are about. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you very much. And again, I just want to reiterate the fact that leadership is not a position, it's a behavior. And if we as small business do provide almost 90% of the workforce, that's a lot of people that we touch their lives every day when they come to the workplace. And so if we can instill and plant a seed of hope and plant a seed of leadership, and then we water those seeds, they're going to harvest, and positive harvest, and it's gonna be generational change. It's not just going to change that one person, because that person changes, they go home and it changes with their spouse, it changes with their children and their children's children. So we're going to make generational changes on this podcast, and by the small business being leaders and teaching their staff to be leaders as well. So thank you for listening.
Thank you all. And today we're not going to have a Spanish session, but we're going to transcribe this session and we're going to send it upon request. So thank you all for being here. And as I said, please send us the topics and please send us the questions. We're going to be looking forward to them. And thank you again, Julissa and Willie, for taking the time to doing this. Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you.